The courtroom was quiet, too quiet. A 6-year-old girl walked in holding the leash of an old war dog with half a torn ear and eyes that had seen battle. She didn't speak, not a word since the day a stranger tried to steal her. But when she raised just one finger, that dog stood up, growled, and locked eyes with the man on trial. And in that instant, everyone in the room knew this wasn't just testimony. This was war. There used to be laughter in Maplewood, the kind that floated out of school playgrounds, echoed down cul-de-sacs, and blended with the chirping cicadas on warm summer evenings. It was a kind of small town where front porches were still used, where neighbors brought casseroles after surgeries, and where kids rode their bikes until the streetlights blinked on. But something changed, slowly at first, like a bad smell you can't quite place. Then all at once, a girl named Rebecca vanished on her way home from choir practice. Then months later, it was Mason, snatched from behind the gas station while his mom paid inside. The police had no leads, no suspects, just a growing silence where laughter used to be. Parents started gripping their children's hands tighter. Dogs were walked with pepper spray. Schools hired security guards. And worst of all, the innocence in the eyes of the town's children began to dull. Fear, that ancient parasite, had made itself at home in Maplewood, and it would take something truly extraordinary, not a badge or a gun, to drag it back out into the light. 6-year-old Lily Montgomery hadn't always been silent. Before that day, she was a whirlwind of questions and glitter, a child who could name every type of butterfly and recite entire episodes of her favorite cartoon from memory. Her laugh, sharp and silly, used to make her grandpa chuckle from across the house. But after the barn, after the stranger with the gravel voice and the smell of motor oil, her world collapsed inward like a paper lantern in a storm. She never screamed. Not once. When her mother found her huddled behind the woodpile, dress torn and knees bleeding, her green eyes didn't even blink. No words, no tears, just silence, like someone had taken her voice and locked it away behind some invisible door. Doctors called it selective mutism, a psychological shutdown triggered by trauma. But labels didn't change what her mother saw each night. A little girl curled in fetal position, clutching her blanket like a lifeline, flinching at the sound of a car door. And the worst part? The man who did this, who had bent down and asked Lily if she wanted to see newborn kittens in his truck, was still out there, still smiling, still fooling people, because Lily couldn't speak. And the law, it doesn't listen to silence. Sometimes, the help you need comes on 4 legs with a limp and a 1,000-yard stare. Boone wasn't just any dog. He was a legend in his own right, a Belgian Malinois. Trained for military operations overseas, Boone had once sniffed out bombs under Humvees and pulled wounded soldiers from burning wreckage. But after his last tour, after shrapnel had ripped through his hindquarters and burned half his right ear, the Army sent him home to be put down. He was too old, too slow, too broken, until Hank Montgomery, Lily's grandpa and a decorated Vietnam veteran himself, pulled some strings and brought Boone home to Maplewood. Hank saw the fire in that dog's eyes, the kind of pain only warriors understand. They healed each other, man and mutt. Quiet mornings on the porch, long walks behind property line, naps beside the fire. And then came Lily, small, wounded, mute. At first, she avoided Boone. But one night, during a thunderstorm, she crept from her bed and lay beside him, fingers trembling as they sank into his thick coat. Boone didn't move. He just let her stay. From that moment on, he never left her side. Wherever Lily went, Boone followed. And somehow, in his stillness, he heard what no one else could. Her pain, her terror, her truth. Because sometimes when a child loses their voice, what they need is a therapist or a courtroom. They need a witness with teeth. It started in the therapy room, where Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, flanked by 2 adults speaking in soft, clinical tones that made her skin crawl. The therapist, a kind woman with crow's feet and steady hands, had worked with children like Lily before. She knew that pushing too hard, too fast would only drive the child deeper into her shell. So instead, she studied Boone. The dog barely blinked, his eyes fixed on Lily like a sentinel. And after several sessions, The therapist tried something different. She introduced a concept of nonverbal signals, small gestures used by hostage survivors to silently communicate distress or danger. They were simple but powerful. A hand pressed flat to the chest, a double blink, and one specific motion, the raising of a single pinky finger. It meant, "Help me, it's him." Lily's first reaction to the gesture was subtle. She didn't imitate it, just stared at the therapist's hand, then at Boone. But 3 days later, during a session in which pictures of generic male faces were quietly laid out, Lily raised her pinky without a word. Boone tensed instantly, shifting closer to her side, his hackles rising just enough to be noticed. The therapist wrote it down in all caps, responded to image number 7 with signal. Dog reacted. From then on, the pinky signal wasn't just a therapeutic tool. It was Lily's lifeline, a language shared with one soul and one soul only, the one who could hear her without needing a single word. Maplewood was a town where everyone knew everyone, or so they thought. Carl Dillard had been the guy who fixed your sink without charging you for labor. He'd volunteer at the Sunday food bank, laugh too loudly at his own jokes, and wave at every cop he passed. No one thought twice when he offered to drive the church youth group to camp. And when the rumors started, when kids began to disappear, he was the first to organize a neighborhood watch. So when the police pulled up to Carl's small brick house on a Tuesday morning and slapped cuffs on him in front of half the town, it felt like fiction. The charges? Suspicion of attempted abduction. The evidence? Weak at best. An eyewitness account, blurry security footage, a tip from a child therapist who wasn't even allowed to testify. But then came the photo lineup. Detective Marquez showed Lily 10 pictures, keeping his face unreadable. She stared for a moment, hand resting on Boone's back. Then, slowly, like moving through fog, her pinky lifted. Boone growled. Not barked, not whimpered. Growled. Deep and low. The photo was Carl Dillard. And suddenly, the town that once shook their heads at the idea that one of us could do something like this began to remember how Carl had shown up to every search party, how he'd always known just where to look, how his smile, in hindsight, never quite reached his eyes. The DA didn't have enough to lock him up for life, but they had enough to bring him to trial. And Lily? She had Boone, and she had a pinky, and sometimes that's all it takes to drag a monster into the light. The courtroom was older than most in the county, its wood panel walls steeped in decades of quiet judgments and whispered regrets. But on the morning of Carl Dillard's trial, it felt like something sacred had been disturbed. A storm was brewing behind those dignified columns. The prosecution had filed a special motion requesting the presence of Boone beside Lily during her testimony, citing his medical certification as a trauma support animal. The defense balked, of course, arguing the dog's presence would unfairly bias the jury, that a snarling war dog would create drama where facts should speak. But Judge Harold Brenner, a soft-spoken widower with a reputation for ironclad ethics, looked over his glasses and gave a slow, measured nod. Sometimes justice has to make room for mercy, he said, and the gavel struck like a shot heard round the county. That moment divided the town. Some called it a stunt. Others saw it as the first time the system had ever bent to protect a child before a criminal. But in that courtroom, as Lily walked in with Boone's leash wrapped tightly in her tiny fingers and settled into the oversized wooden chair like a whisper in the wind, no one, jury, press, or judge, could look away. You could have heard a pin drop when Lily took her seat, her legs swinging above the floor, her face unreadable behind a wall of unspoken pain. But it was Boone who changed the air in the room. He didn't bark or growl. He just stared, locked in on Carl Dillard with such focused intensity that several jurors leaned forward unconsciously, like pulled by an invisible string. Dillard tried to smile, that old rehearsed grin he used on scout troops and elderly widows, but it cracked around the edges. Boone's eyes didn't blink. And then it happened. Lily's hand twitched. Her pinky lifted, small, deliberate, slow. It was the same signal taught in that quiet therapy office, the one she had only used a handful of times before. Boone's response was instantaneous. His body tensed. A rumble rolled up from his chest. Quiet, controlled, but deeply unsettling. A growl not of aggression, but recognition. The kind of sound a mother bear makes when she smells a hunter nearby. The judge's head turned. The courtroom collectively inhaled. And in that silence, something shifted. You didn't need a law degree to feel it. That wasn't just a dog reacting to fear. That was a creature who knew, who remembered. Somewhere, somehow, that dog had met this man sent before. And that revelation slammed to the courtroom like a gust of icy wind under the door of a burning house. What followed was a slow drip of horror. The prosecution, emboldened by Boone's reaction and Lily's unwavering body language, began painting a story with chilling precision, not just about Lily's encounter, but about a pattern. Testimony came in from 2 neighboring counties, families who had lost children, 2 confirmed abductions, 1 still missing, similar setups, similar vehicles, and always the presence of a friendly man offering kittens or a shortcut home or a fatherly smile. None of it stuck before. There was never enough to connect the dots. But now the timeline overlapped. Carl Diller had installed a water heater in one of the homes 2 weeks before their child disappeared. He volunteered at a bingo night fundraiser at another. And when the prosecution displayed a crude sketch drawn by a 5-year-old girl in another county, a man in a gray cap with a badge on his belt, the courtroom froze. Carl had been known to wear an old utility belt from his brief stint in maintenance. Even more haunting, the child had drawn a dog beside the man. Not any dog, one with 1 torn ear. Boone. The room spun for several people. The pieces weren't just falling into place. They were carving a path to something long buried and monstrous. On the 3rd day of trial, as the defense prepared to cross-examine Lily, the courtroom reached a level of tension that felt almost physical. You could feel it in your chest, like the press of a seatbelt before impact. Carl's attorney approached the girl gently, projecting concerned compassion. Everything a good actor should. "Lily," he said softly, "you've seen my client's face before, haven't you? In pictures. On TV. Could that be why Boone reacted the way he did?" Lily didn't speak. She didn't even blink. But her hand slowly reached down and rested on Boone's back. Her fingers tapped twice. Boone exhaled. And then, with the eyes of the world on him, he stood. Slow. Controlled. He turned to face Carl directly and took 3 steady steps forward, placing himself between Lily and the man in the defendant's chair. No command. No prompting. Just instinct. His ears flattened. His growl was deeper this time. Old. Primal. Carl shifted uncomfortably, then visibly recoiled. The jury didn't miss it. Neither did the judge, nor the rows of veterans in the gallery. Men who knew that growl, who had trusted overseas when their lives depended on it. The dog had just given testimony in a language that needed no translator. And in that moment, no juror, no lawyer, no reporter dared to question the truth that lingered in the air like smoke. The dog knew. Carl Dillard was unraveling. Slowly. Publicly. His lawyer tried to cover it, objecting to the dog's behavior as theatrical, emotional manipulation, and potentially dangerous. But even his voice cracked with nerves. And when court resumed that afternoon, something in Carl had changed. His fingers, once steady and composed, now drummed erratically on the table. His eyes twitched to the exits. He refused to meet Lily's gaze. Boone sat beside her, silent but alert, his breath steady as if daring the man to move an inch too far. The final blow came not from Lily or the prosecutors, but from the past. A cold case investigator stepped forward with grainy surveillance footage from a rest stop. 6 years old, never matched to any face. But when it played to the jury, Lily's body language changed. She pointed at the screen, then at Carl. Boone responded immediately. The judge leaned forward. The room went silent. The defense attorney froze. Carl's facade cracked in real time. His breathing quickened. His collar tightened. And for the first time since his arrest, his carefully rehearsed mask slipped just enough to show what was underneath. A predator, caught in the snare of a little girl's silence and a war dog's memory. And somewhere in the chaos, an electric hum of realization that swept through the room, a single pinky rose once more, and no one dared dismiss again. Hank Montgomery had been quiet through most of the trial. He sat in the gallery beside Lily's mother, his Vietnam veteran's posture still sharp despite the years, his eyes hidden beneath a worn cap he hadn't taken off since the arrest. But when the court allowed him to testify, not as a witness to the crime, but as a character reference for Boone, he stood with a grace that made the room lean in. The bailiff swore him in, but Hank didn't need a script. He looked at the jury, his voice steady as a rifle's report. "That dog ain't trained to perform," he said. "He's trained to protect. He's trained to sense the kind of evil that walks on two legs and lies with a straight face. You can't fake scent. You can't trick instinct. If Boone growled at that man," he said, pointing a weathered finger at Dillard, "then it's because that dog already met the devil once, and he remembers his smell." Silence fell over the room like a velvet curtain. Jurors exchanged glances. One man visibly swallowed, and behind them, Lily sat completely still, her tiny hand resting gently on Boone's back, as if drawing courage from the dog who had once faced war and decided he wasn't done fighting for one more little girl. The final piece came not from a court, but from the land itself. Acting on Boone's first reaction during the initial police interview, Detective Marquez revisited the Montgomery property, focusing on the old barn where Lily had been found. Something about Boone's pacing that day hadn't sat right with him. This time, he brought ground-penetrating radar and a forensics team. They scanned the floors, the walls, and then, near the northeast corner, hidden beneath old plywood and rusted tools, they found it, a concealed trapdoor. Below, in a crude crawl space, were remnants: duct tape with strand of hair, a discarded roll of candy wrappers, and a jacket that matched the one Lily had drawn in crayon. DNA confirmed what the prosecution feared, and the defense prayed against. It was Carl Dillard's. A hidden chamber of horror, right where Lily said she had been. That evidence changed everything. It wasn't just Boone's word anymore, it was hard science. And for the first time, the man who smiled too easily and helped too eagerly looked like exactly what he was. A predator who would use kindness as camouflage and charm as a cage. There would be no more doubt. The truth had crawled out from under the boards and into the light, and no jury in the country could unsee it. In a final, desperate act, the defense tried one more spin. Carl's lawyer claimed Boone had been coached to react, that the pinky signal was just a game, taught to Lily to secure a conviction, that the media had warped the trial and turned it into a circus of emotion. But the jury wasn't listening anymore. They had seen the dog. They had seen the girl. And worse, they had seen Carl's face when Boone growled. That flinch, uncoached, instinctive, undeniable. Still, the defense clung to doubt. That is, until another woman came forward. She wasn't from Maplewood. She wasn't even from the state. But she had watched the trial on TV and recognized the jacket in the police evidence photo. Her daughter had vanished 3 years ago in a different county. The case had gone cold. But she had saved a sketch her little girl made just before she disappeared. A picture of a man with a crooked smile and a missing tooth next to a van with a faded bumper sticker. Church League softball champions. That same sticker was on Dillard's van when they arrested him. The courtroom gasped. The DA moved quickly. The judge allowed her testimony. The defense fell apart. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. It was about every child who never got to raise a pinky. The day the verdict was read, the courtroom was standing room only. Local news anchors, national press, neighbors who hadn't left their houses in weeks, all packed together like witnesses to history. Carl Dillard sat pale, sweating, visibly shaking as the foreman stood to read the jury's decision. Guilty on all counts. The judge didn't flinch. "You will serve life without parole," he said. "You are to die behind walls your victims will never have to fear again." Carl collapsed into his chair like a marionette with its strings cut. But the real moment, the one that would echo beyond the court, beyond the town, beyond headlines, came afterward, when the judge turned to Lily and thanked her for her courage. "You saved others," he said, his voice hoarse. Lily looked up, hesitated, then reached down and cradled Boone's grizzled face in her hands. Her lips moved. One word. Clear, soft, strong enough to shatter every heart in the room. Safe. That was it. Not a monologue. Not a breakdown. Just that one sacred word. The word her family hadn't heard in months. Her mother wept into Hank's shoulder. Boone wagged his tail once and licked her palm. In that moment, the war was over, and the silence was broken. Carl Diller was buried beneath prison walls and forgotten, but Lily Montgomery's story became something else. A legend told at kitchen tables, in PTA meetings, in every room where parents whispered about protecting their children. Boone lived out his years in peace, sleeping beside Lily's bed, walking with Hank to the coffee shop every Sunday morning. Kids in the neighborhood came by to feed him treats and scratch behind his one torn ear. And on the day he passed, peacefully, under an old oak tree in the backyard, Lily was there, now 9, whispering stories to him like prayers. A statue was erected outside the courthouse 3 months later. Not of the judge, not of the lawyers, but a girl and a dog, standing side by side, facing forward. The plaque read, "Sometimes heroes don't speak. Sometimes they growl." And for the folks of Maplewood, especially the ones old enough to remember a time when trust was simpler, but danger still wore a smile, that statue meant more than justice. It meant hope. It meant that even in the darkest times, with just a signal and a soldier on 4 legs, good could still win. And sometimes the strongest voices in the courtroom don't come from a witness stand. They come from a bond between a child and a dog who refuse to forget